All right, it is 3:30 on a Tuesday afternoon. Welcome everyone. So wonderful to see you. It seems like a long time since I've been here, and I'm really excited to share this space with all of you again. My name is Anna Kay. I am a behavior support specialist with Albuquerque Public Schools. And on behalf of the NMPD and the University of New Mexico, I'm so delighted to welcome you to our Echo for Social Emotional Learning session today, geared towards school leaders and social emotional learning in their school sites. So Echo for SEL is a virtual community of practice. And again, my name is Anna Kay. We have a long list of goals that we aim to accomplish in each session. Rather than reading them all, I'm just going to put them into the chat so you have access to them. And I'm just going to begin with some introductions. I'll start with Echo IT.
Hi, everybody. This is Eddie with Project Echo IT. I just want to remind everybody real quick to stay muted if you're not going to be speaking. If you joined using the computer monitor, you can click on the microphone icon. And if you use the telephone to join, you can use *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. And next, I'll have Christina introduce herself.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to see all of you again. My name is Christina Anaya. I am the program coordinator for the education team here at Project Echo. And if all of you could just take a brief moment to fill out our attendance form that I posted for you in the chat, we'd really appreciate it. And if you have any questions throughout the session, feel free to direct message me.
Thanks, Christina. Ruby, do you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Ruby Baker, and I'm a program assistant with Echo for Education.
Wonderful. And next, I'll introduce our hub team members. For the sake of time, I'll just call out their names and have them wave and introduce themselves that way. I'm going to begin with Laurel Wyckoff. Wonderful. Jen Chavez-Miller. Kathy Price. Amy McConnell-Franklin. And I will save introductions for our two wonderful presenters. I'll introduce them in just a moment. So today we have the opportunity to learn a little bit more about the ABCs of social emotional learning through school attitudes, beliefs, and climate. Our first workshop presenter today is going to be Cynthia Ramirez. Cynthia Ramirez is a Chicana born and raised in Albuquerque. Cynthia earned her bachelor's degree in both sociology and psychology from the University of New Mexico and a master's in social work from New Mexico Highlands University. She also holds a level 3 pre-K through 12 administrative license and is currently the director of student support at Technology Leadership High School, which she is part of the founding team at that school. She is a certified GLSEN professional development trainer and a deeper learning equity fellow. Her career experience reflects her passion and commitment to serving and advocating for LGBTQ youth, gang-involved youth, young people of color, and students in the Albuquerque area. In her spare time, Cynthia teaches fitness classes and is a certified Zumba instructor. She loves spending time with her family, friends, baking, and reading. I'm also honored to present our second presenter today, Gilbert Ramirez. Gilbert Ramirez is a licensed clinical and school social worker. His career began at school social work for the Albuquerque Public School District. During this time, he co-founded a high school gang intervention program. Recognized as a national expert in this area, he co-authored 3 publications on effective gang interviews through Oxford University Press. In 2013, Mr. Ramirez co-founded a public charter school as the student support director at Health Leadership High School. He developed the Department of Student Support and created the school-based student support model framework. And as a result of his work, he was asked to be a fact witness for a landmark case, the Yazzie Martinez versus State of New Mexico, in which he provided testimony around the importance of behavioral health access for all students and integrating social emotional learning frameworks in schools. In 2014, he was selected as a W.K. Kellogg Foundation Community Leadership Network Fellow. In 2018, Mayor Tim Keller appointed Mr. Ramirez as the Deputy Director for Behavioral Health and Wellness Programs for the City of Albuquerque. He is currently working to guide the city's behavioral health initiatives and support the ongoing work around creating a comprehensive continuum of behavioral health care citywide. So I'm very excited to turn it over to them and learn along with you today.
Good afternoon. Oh, there we go. All right. Buenos tardes. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this session. I know we don't have a whole lot of time, but I know giving up an hour of any time availability for most folks is quite a commitment. So I appreciate you all joining us today. And so did you want to say anything to the group?
I just want to say welcome, and I have spoken for SEL ECHO twice, and so I really wanted to highlight the work Gilbert's doing, and so I will be jumping in as we go to discuss the work. But yeah, I was going to just say welcome to everybody and then put it back to you.
All right. Well, I'll go ahead and share my screen here for our presentation today. Let me jump into our live view. There we are. Well, welcome everybody. And I see logged on, there are some former coworkers that I had the privilege of working with at our Health Leadership High School, as well as other folks that I've seen in the community. So again, it always warms my heart to be able to speak to like-minded folks doing the work and championing of our young people in the community so that we can promote their absolute best outcomes and to kind of join us in the work that we need to do in the community. So thank you for that wonderful introduction. And yeah, the work here has been a little different transitioning over to city government, but with that being said, there's a lot of history of work to share. And also maybe I'll close with a little bit of how it does transition into other jobs and arenas outside of just school environments. So today, what we thought we put together was a little presentation on, the ABCs of SEL. And in all honesty, school attitudes, beliefs, and climate. If I didn't address the issue of recently we've experienced some very unfortunate situations either on or near school campuses in which young people have been the victims of some violence at the hands of guns in our community. And a lot of us are really worried around the safety, the climate of our schools and what's going on. But at the root of this, it's very common for us to address the immediate issue and how we're responding to those families, those children, the students, and supporting them, but also understanding that, there's the immediate crisis intervention that's happening. And then there's the larger upstream, midstream, downstream responses that we can have as to how we're supporting our young people to build skills to be able to navigate conflict and move through our world of complex challenges in a nonviolent way, right? So I think this kind of will speak to that. SEL definitely lends itself to that. And so I will touch a little bit about of that on this presentation. So yes, I'm a clinical social worker and school social worker. I had the privilege of starting my first job as a social worker in APS, working over at Highland High School. And with that work, it really enlightened my eyes as to a lot of things that are being done well and need more of, and also how we can be innovative around changing some of those frameworks. So with that, we'll jump kind of into our objectives for today. And I know the slide deck will be provided for you. So take notes of what you feel is important. And if not, you can access this later so that you can have it. Definitely want to start with, school climate data. It's so important to understand, we always see these surveys, parent surveys, student surveys, staff surveys, but there's some real intentionality behind how we can use that data to substantiate the supports that we need to build out at our schools. So we will touch a little bit about that. We also want to start diving into kind of school environments and predictors of related student attendance. The bestseller, I think, and I'll talk about this a lot probably in this presentation, is if you want an administrator to really jump on board with how we're going to implement SEL in the school, talk attendance and how you're going to get numbers up at the school, right? Attendance is a big issue. If they're not in our schools, it's a challenge. And so we will talk about that. Increased knowledge on how student behavior is tied to unsolved problems, lagging skills, and developmental relationships. So this will probably be my lens on discipline. Right? How do we work with young people in a different way and addressing behavior in a different way? It really is intentional and it does require us to kind of step back, but the payoffs and the dividends can be huge. And then lastly, we'll kind of close up around talking about integration of advisory. And I see one of our former advisors, I think on the Zoom today, so we'll be able to kind of pivot over to some professionals. You know, the advisory model and supporting our young people can be so crucial. And so I'll walk us through a little bit of that in this presentation. So typically I start this off, and I've done this presentation in person, so I can't do that, but I always like to engage my audience. And so I would always say, you know, hey, pull out your phones. And if in your phone, you have the Google app for your search browser, there's a lot of great things about Google, right? And so Google allows the ability to kind of track algorithms and data of what people search for, and then do this wonderful thing that we all either like or hate, which is either predictive text or predictive search. And they generate this information based on what are the most commonly searched for items in Google. So if you have the Safari browser on your iPhone, unfortunately won't do this, but Google is really good and you can always download that. So I put this as Google this. All I did, and these are screenshots from my phone, is I put in there, school makes me feel. Now, if you look at these predictive answers, these are the top data analytic answers that we are seeing trending from folks who are also searching this question. If you look at the answers, they're pretty sad. It's unfortunate, but it is a reality of like, what are the top searched areas, right? School makes me feel like, it makes me feel stupid, sick, like a robot, sad, stressed, anxious, tired, numb. And then we get a good one at the bottom, happy. School makes me feel like a robot, a failure, an idiot, crying, and it goes on. So I don't intentionally want to start off the idea of like, this is the work and the challenge we have to face and it's overwhelming. But my presentation today, and talking with Cynthia too, is how are we addressing climate, behavior, and understanding what kids are feeling in our schools? And this is just a quick way for you to be able to say, wow, you know, these analytics are actually from folks who are looking this up, and these are the most common predicted answers based on what people search for. So that tells us something. But let's move into some more data. All right, so student reflections. When we talk about understanding data and school climate, it's so important to kind of walk through and understand, like there's tons of studies that have been done, and I'll reference the one that this one comes from, but understanding your very own school climate and how you use that data is integral. What have we learned though from the years of working with young people? And so highlighting here, this was a response done from Chicago schools and a consortium there. And they were really interested. They were experiencing a lot of violence, a lot of gang issues in the community. And so they were trying to figure out like what is happening and what are students feeling about school. So if you look at these answers, you really see how things change from elementary to middle school to high school. So you can read this, of course, I don't need to read it to you, but on elementary, I will note that it closes with a statement that I just think is beautiful to the work that we do. It was kind of like, you know, family. Moving on to middle school, these are what children replied and said. You know, teachers are tired, students are mean, it's harder than before, teachers have more favorites, you get in trouble for stuff that you've undone before. So kids aren't really justice-based, they're really about fairness, and it's sometimes hard to get to that root with them. And then you start developing your social dynamic groups. So either you're in a group, you're not in a group, you either fit in or you don't. And then you get to high school and it's just disheartening, right? Teachers are mean, classes are boring, nobody helps, nobody cares if I'm there or not. It's too hard, it starts way too early, right? It doesn't meet the developmental framework of adolescence and when they should actually be up and their brain should be working. Now let's also take into consideration populations. Most elementary schools might be anywhere from 200 up to about 500 students, maybe a little more. Then when you get to middle school, you're looking at populations of maybe 400 up to 800 students. And then you get to comprehensive large high schools and you start looking at populations of anywhere from 900 on up to 2,500 or more. So there's a difference also understanding the climate and how big schools can lose children really quickly just with this data. All right, so again, I said earlier, there's no better way to sell this to, and I'm giving you guys the golden key and answer, the silver bullet and lining as to how do we address this attendance issue, right? It's been in front of us forever. Those of us who had a good teacher in our lives and can remember back to like that one teacher that made a difference in our life, what happened? You trusted that teacher cared about you, right? So this is really a simple answer. Why do kids go to class? And this is a study I was referencing for the other data. Best predictor of attendance, honestly, I trust my teacher cares about me. Foundational principles to SEL, what we do and how we connect with young people. So it's not rocket science. it's a pretty simple concept, and we know that good teachers never have kids miss their class. And we know, unfortunately, some teachers who aren't so revered tend to have the attendance issues, right? Kids connect, kids believe, kids want to trust. And if you treat them with that respect, you don't have a lot of those issues. And then they can get complicated with life issues and other things, which we'll dive into, but it's a good understanding. Now, I embedded a link here. I'd be remiss if I didn't give my due respect to the great late Rita Pearson. If you have not seen this video, that every child needs a champion, you know, I actually put this on while I was doing the slide deck just to pep me up and remind myself why we do this work, why it's important to remember that every child needs a champion. And if you're feeling down and out and or exhausted and overwhelmed, please click the video, put it on. It will bring that spirit of life back to you. All right, again, moving forward with kind of understanding student-teacher trust. So this came from the data that was collected in that study. You know, talking a little bit about how teachers always keep their promises. Teachers they try to be fair. These components come from young people who have probably had stronger connections with certain teachers and or feel that these are the things that keep them away, or feeling like their kids can often be very black and white. There is no gray. And so when they're put on one side or the other, they can tend to disconnect, right? But the importance of all faculty at the school, the relationships that you have with young people, and making sure that, are these components in place at your school? Are these things that you're assessing, evaluating, and also understanding that this is the climate of our school, these are the attitudes and beliefs, and or have we never even bothered to look at this and see what our young people feel about our own staff and the work that we're doing? I kind of close it out there with a video to the Search Institute. They've also put some stuff there about Spark Champions. This is a little video that young people are actually talking about what their sparks are. Have you taken the time to find out what a young person's spark is, right? And that video will walk you through, like, my spark is ballet, my spark is sports. However, this is how I'm supported with my spark at school by my advisor. I encourage you, watch that video. It talks a little bit about how we can invest in young people's sparks.
And so just to kind of interject real quick, if for those of you who haven't attended and want to reflect back to the other two previous talks I've given, I go into the developmental assets. I go into an advisory framework based on the developmental assets, and links to all that are in the previous slides, the slide decks that from previous times we've spoken. And then I want you all that if you have questions, please place them in the chat so that I can start kind of sifting through of how we can also be responsive to you all as a community of what needs are, so that once we get through the slide deck, we can go through that too. Okay.
No, thank you, Cynthia, because I talk about measurement tools and she is hitting on some key ones that we've used while we implemented this. This is a photo of some young men that I worked with. I started my career at Highland High School and APS, and I was very fortunate that that was like literally the only school I was ever at. I love the community. I love who we serve. These were primarily first generation Mexican-American young boys. The situation that we had at the school were there were a lot of racial tensions happening on the campus and a lot of kind of gang conflicts that were going on. And what we continued to see with regards to discipline was ongoing suspensions of young people and no resolutions to the problems. Nobody was actually willing or had the skill to sit down with these groups and find out what are the conflicts actually about? How do we get to the actual problem that's creating the conflict and the environment or the climate that's threatening the safety of the school? Thank goodness at the time we had an administration that allowed me and my colleague to kind of go out and say, hey, look, if you want to work with these kids, go for it, but you might want to do some of these mediations offsite. We don't want them on campus. And so we did. And eventually we built a program that really honestly allowed us to identify who these young men were and bring them into a support group environment that implemented many of the SEL skills that we need, that we talk about in these kind of dialogues. These young men honestly just felt lost in a school that they didn't understand where they belonged, how they fit in. The culture was different. And therefore there was naturally going to be tensions, right? And so, in all honesty, I took a picture. We always were photographing our boys, and we've taken them to present at conferences because that's part of their leadership development, part of the SEL. I highlight it because the one thing that they may have had was horrible attendance in classes, but they never missed group. We met every Wednesday, and at the time we had a block schedule for an hour and 25 minutes. And literally they would not miss group. To them, group was where they came to de-stress, get that support, unload all the heavy things they were dealing with in the streets and their families and in the community. This is SEL at its core, right? It's providing those safe spaces and support. And these young men, as tough as they look, when we got them into this room and we sat them down, they were the young boys that wanted to play and had dreams just like everyone else. The gang part of their life was one component, but it was not their entirety. It was not the whole young person that we had. And they were some of the most respectful young men that I had ever worked with. And in a way, we started changing that culture at the school to be able to allow them to take pride in the school and integrate them into activities. Otherwise, they had no clue. Now, I pivot over to Cynthia because this work wasn't done in isolation. Cynthia happened to be working at the feeder middle school over at Van Buren, and she had these boys before I had these boys. So she was doing the prep work, and I'm sure she could speak to that. And she was identifying, and we had created this kind of continuum. So like 6th grade through 8th grade, she was wrapping herself around these young boys and then passing them to my colleague and I by the time we got them in 9th grade. And I'm very honored to say that, you know, we put them to work by doing presentations, doing fundraising. We took them on trips. Many of these boys had never seen an ocean, and we took them to California with the fundraising they did. It was about meeting simple things and exposing them to other viewpoints of the world that they just didn't have. They didn't know anything other than their neighborhood. They didn't have that ability to dream or think beyond, maybe like some of us here on this presentation. It was providing them those opportunities. Then we started a program. The district began to really support it. And then we got some national recognition to really talk about how do you work with young men in gangs and schools, because a lot of people honestly were either afraid of it, they were intimidated by it, they didn't want to touch it, or they didn't want it happening at their campus. And we knew suspension and arrest was not the answer. So we'll talk about group work and kind of how we built that. All right, now I'll jump into, I had the opportunity while I was in the schools to go to Dr. Ross Green's presentations a couple of times. Now, if you all know Dr. Ross Green, additionally, he started this, which was called collaborative problem solving. Now I think it's collaborative proactive solutions. But basically his mantra was that behind every challenging behavior is an unsolved problem or lagging skill. He was basically calling us out to say, look, he's a clinician, we were clinicians, but this isn't clinical. This is basic understanding that if there's a problem in front of a young person or any person for that fact, you're going to struggle with how you move forward. And are we taking the time to drill down and get into what is the problem and how do we help you? So it was great because I had been through his trainings, and honestly, you know, he's a dry presenter, but his theories and what he teaches is awesome. And he's got videos, and all of his forms and everything are free on his websites. So they're included in the bottom. It does make sense that when you start working with young people, do we create spaces to sit and really say, hey, I'm noticing that every time, 3rd period, I find you out in the bathroom right around this certain time. What's up? And I'm actually using a real case. There was this young man that I would constantly find in the hall and near the bathroom right around this certain period of time. And I don't think anyone ever stopped to ask the young man, like, why are you out of class? And so I did, because I was the friendly kind of person that wanted to know everything about every kid. And the kid kind of was telling me, well, you know, he didn't want to tell me too much, but eventually we got to the issue. It just so happened that during that period of time, it was a reading class that he was in. He was an ESL student who didn't really proficiently speak English. And it was during that time the teacher had them reading out loud. And he was so embarrassed to read out loud. So he would go to the bathroom and he would just avoid the class. Now, one very small example of honestly what Dr. Ross Green's process is do we sit and learn what the problem is that's holding the young person back, why the behavior is there, because it is a coping skill. The young man did learn how to not get embarrassed in class. And then how do we address it? Sit with the teacher, talk to alternative ways that we can do it so he can still be in class, be engaged, but not be shamed for his accent or lack of proficiency in the language, right? So that really is the core of Dr. Ross Green's work. And I did integrate this kind of training because we're going to talk about how do we support teachers to have the skills they need to do this with kids. And it's not clinical. You don't need to diagnose anybody. All right. So again, I love how he closes here. Kids do well if they can. This is part of his mantra. And he was clear that if they can't, then we adults need to figure out what's getting in the way so that we can help. If not, we get stuck in kids do well if they wanna. And he does caution that if you get into the mantra of kids do well if they wanna, we put the blame on the kid. We do exactly what's on this list. Well, it's because bipolar disorder. It's because the child's adopted. It's because they just are seeking attention. When we come at a mindset for young people that they do well if they wanna, I honestly don't know any kid that doesn't want to do good. They may have a lot of obstacles in front of them, a lot of challenges, but it's our job to help them figure out what that is and get back to the idea and the mindset that kids really do well if they can. And if they can't, it's our job to help them figure out why, what's in their way, how do we support them? And that is SEL at its core, right? Creating environments, climates, beliefs, and attitudes in young people that will get us to this place. The kids do well if they can and help us move away, because it's real easy to fall into this culture. The kids do well if they want to. All right, so again, this is his model, but summarizing, his like 8-hour presentation and just a slide, that young people have legitimate concerns. Adults have legitimate concerns. What is the process that we use to bring them to the table and actually have a conversation about that? Like I mentioned, hey, I noticed every day, third period, you're in the hall and in the bathroom. And I was just wondering, like, why aren't you ever in class? What's up? We put our concerns on the table. Typically, young people will respond with an answer as to educating us and enlightening us as to what is that problem, right? So remember, though, that if we blow a kid's concerns off the table because we want to meet ours, that child's going to blow, right? And Cynthia and I talked plenty of times about the Coke can model, right? What happens to a Coke can when you shake the hell out of it? It's going to explode. Emotions and feelings are no different. If you just keep burying your emotions and burying your emotions, eventually they're going to blow and they will deal with you, because you can't just do that, right? All right. So with that being said, if you're familiar with big picture learning, which I'm sure many of you are, big picture learning schools, and I love this, the one words I will highlight here, and how many times are we seeing this even in the children's surveys? It's the soul of the school, and it's often described as a home or a second family. When you create advisory models in your school, and I've seen them done in a lot of different arenas, but when we opened up Health Leadership High School, we came from a framework that advisory was going to be the core. The advisor was going to facilitate and guide the student through everything, from discipline to college enrollment to supporting them, and we were there to lend ourselves to them. That whole model and understanding that advisories can truly, truly be powerful if they're intentional, if the teachers have the training, that's what we can do with SEL. And so big picture, I put a link in here. This is a wonderful video of Carlos Moreno actually walking through his advisory, and you see the culture that he builds in that classroom, and you kind of get to see like these kids love him. They love him like almost a father, and they respect him. And yet he holds them accountable for everything that they're either falling behind on or they're not doing. It's a myth that advisors can also be the heavy and hold kids accountable. We can hold them accountable when you have that trust and that relationship we mentioned earlier that was stated. All right. Our advisory framework that we created at Health Leadership High School, and I know Cynthia shared this with her presentations, it was really intentional. And when we brought in our advisors, all of our teachers, every teacher was also going to be an advisor. And we were going to work to support them with the skills and the training they needed. And then the social work team that was going to also lend themselves to them to support them. We wanted our advisory frameworks to be utilized to support student skills and behavior, right? So we changed the script. There was a behavior policy manual, but there was no scripted A to B, right? You did this, you get 3-day suspension. You do this, you get 5-day suspension. Everything was done through a family meeting model, and it was individualized for that student. Our goal was not the punishment. Our goal was to walk a young person through the process of what their behavior did. Why did they do it? Who did it affect? How did it affect others? And we were going to bring every single stakeholder to the table that was important to that young person at that time. So parent, grandparent, the advisor, a teacher, a coach at the school, the social worker that was working with the young person. And we were going to follow that drill down process as to when this is happening, we're concerned, what's up? And let me tell you, when I was done doing a lot of these, because I facilitated most of them, the young person was like, I would have preferred that you suspended me for 10 days and put me through that, because I had to have a hard conversation with my parents that I've never had before. I had to communicate things with you all that I felt vulnerable and not, this was a whole switch. of addressing the lagging skills that young people need to know in life, whether it's in a relationship, at school, with people they trust, don't trust. We were working on developing those skills with young people in a much different way. And I had plenty of kids that were like, Mr. I don't want a family meeting. Every time I go, I cry. They cry because we get to the root source of what's going on. And we want to hear them, and we want to address that in a way that was much different from anything they had experienced. And I will tell you, I had to unfortunately go through an expulsion process with the young man who brought a gun to our campus. Not to hurt anyone, he was actually selling it to another kid. I later ran into that kid in the community. I was filling up my car with gas and I felt somebody coming, and my whole family was with me, and I look over and it's the young man. And he came up to me, and this could have gone a lot of different ways. But the young man approached me and said, "Hey, mister, how are you?" And I looked and I said, "Oh my gosh, how are you? How are things going?" He said, "Good." I said, "Where's your dad?" He's like, "Well, he's over there in the truck." And I waved at him. And then he said, "Hey, mister, I just wanted to tell you, me and you are good. I don't hold anything against you." Sorry, I get choked up because this work, it's tough, you know. And he said, "I appreciate what you did for me. I felt it was fair. And I just want you to know there's nothing bad between you and I." That's the difference of how we address discipline, how we build relationships with young people, and how we know that, you know, although they don't always end in full support for young people, they can end in skills and relationships that we've given them to be able to survive in life and do well. And he was doing okay, he just wasn't in our school anymore. But that's a huge piece of like what we built through advisory and how that component could be influential, and why it's so important, because it's a different framework from a kid saying, "Hey, I owe you, or I'm going to get you back." Right? And we all know that can happen. But it was the approach. I was fair. If you looked at that list of things earlier that I mentioned, I was fair. I allowed them to voice their table. We voiced our concerns. He was very clear on why what he did was not acceptable and that it was a bad decision. But by no means did we not like him or not care about it.
And one thing to emphasize also is just the connection to community. You know, that it's that when we make investments in our youth, we're making investments in our own communities. And that to do that, you know, we've had teachers go into our communities, go to the community centers surrounding our schools, and go talk to youth and tell them about our schools. If they can go into the neighborhoods that our students live in, they can understand also that what it takes for our students to walk in the door, and that we've got to be willing to do that work, because it's not an if but when. Hopefully the work with our students comes full circle in that way.
No, thank you for that, Cynthia. The advisory role that we ultimately were striving to create, and I think we had a lot of success in it, was that adults and young people would share their power. I will say this to the end. Whenever you get into a power and control with a young person, it's a lose-lose, period. Like, that's what's going to happen. But when you have shared power and understanding that you can voice yourself and I can voice myself, and we can get to the root issue and work together to resolve that, it's a win-win. And ultimately, whenever you have a power and control situation, people are going to go to offense and defense, and somebody's going to, you know, everyone's going to shut down. The listening stops, and the resolution points no longer will get there, because you have now a standoff, and it's in our nature, right? Fight or flight. What's going to happen? And who's the authoritarian? And it's not about that, really. What young people want is this, right? And this is what we strive for in our advisory models. You know, how do we do respect, listen, share power, respond accordingly and appropriately, right? And then also in an environment that supports them. When a family meeting needed to happen, it didn't need to happen in the hall. You know, kids don't like to get put on blast. Don't put all my stuff out there, mister. So let's respect that process. And I also knew that we didn't have to just suspend, but sometimes the kid and the adults were not in a place to have that conversation in that moment. So maybe we needed a reset. I'm going to send you home for a day. We're going to pick a time your parents and all stakeholders can be here. We're going to bring you back. We're going to have this family meeting to work through whatever it was that we were addressing, right? So kids knew family meetings were important. And in the end, we were collaborating to solve the problem. All of us at the table, all the stakeholders.
And I want to emphasize this, because what happened a lot of times in working in a comprehensive high school, working in a smaller school, I've worked in elementary, middle, and high. And even at CNM and NMHU, when I taught there, anytime a person does not know what's going to happen, that fight or flight kicks in. And so the defensiveness comes up because, we're in that survival mode. And so if we off the bat teach students, this is the process in which we go through for all our things, so that if something happens where they, like today, where they tell a teacher to F off, they know we're okay. I'm going to go talk to Miss Cynthia. I'm going to have some minutes to like collect my thoughts. And then we might have a family meeting, right? If they do that, regardless of if they walked out, they ditched, they refused to turn their phone in, but if they know that the process is going to happen where their voice is going to be heard, guaranteed it's not going to escalate as quickly, right? So, and we can have a whole presentation on de-escalation alone, but when we go into the advisor roles, it's about every single person in the school is an advisor, and whether we brand it a different name, it's how that person carries out the mission and vision of the school with SEL at its core. And so, so go ahead and keep going, because I know how much time we have, Anna.
I gotta shoot through, sorry.
You know what, because we don't have a case, you guys are good.
Okay.
Almost at the end. Well, no, building off of what Cynthia said, I had a young lady that, we worked tremendously with there at the school, and we all have these stories, but she was so upset one day, and I was trying to address what was going on with her. And in the middle of the hall, she just said, F you, like in front of everyone. And the whole, like all the kids were in the hall, and all I heard were all the kids go, and they were like, you did not just say that to Mr. Gilbert. Like, he's not the dude you say that to at the school, because he don't ever come at the young people that way. Why would you come at him that way, right? That's the culture we had nurtured. But I had a couple of options. I could take that personal. I can make it about me and my ego, and then I can go into the power and control model. Or I could see the young person in front of me that was hurting, probably being overwhelmed by whatever was present at that moment and needing some support. And, Dr. Ross Green talks about that. Whenever you reach the threshold or your capacity to deal with what's put in front of you in that moment, you will melt. We all do. Once we're done, we're done. We either yell, check out, pass out, we can't handle it. And that's what young people are doing. And I always had to remember, this young person is probably in a space where they've reached their capacity and or skill set to be able to deal with all the overwhelming things that she was dealing with in that moment. And I had to just walk away, tell her, Mija, I don't know what's going on, but I'm concerned and I care about you. And when you're ready to talk, I want to support you. Or I could have been like, you're suspended, you told me off, you're going to get this. It didn't go that route, and later on, wonderful relationship with this young lady. We were able to go very deep with regards to the issues that she needed support with, because we had that trust, we had that relationship, the basics, And I mentioned in a training, and a colleague actually said this in a meeting the other day, relationships move at a speed of trust. It is so important to develop that with your young people daily, so that they know that you're going to be there for them, that you're going to listen to them, that you're going to care. And we all get overwhelmed. It's hard. The work is like curriculum plus relationships, and that's so hard, but it's so true, right? You'll get as far. The kids don't care about all the letters after my name, the degrees on my wall. None of that matters. The minute they know I care and I trust, they're going to move mountains for me. That's at the core of SEL. That's the ultimate piece of sharing power and influence with young people.
And
Other
also,
than that, they don't care.
And also to build off of that, just how we say students are loyal to their gangs, they are loyal to their friends, they are, it's not a us versus them. So that mindset feeds into climate, right? And then it also leads into culture of the school. And so when we approach students with, how do we all do this together? Versus it's you and I need to change your state of mind, we remove ourselves from that power struggle. And so when we have like So you just reminded me of something about like, it's paradigm shifts, right? It's not about something being wrong with children needing to be fixed. It's about how we've done traditional school doesn't work for all students. So yes, I don't want you, because I've been in a lot of spaces where they say, oh, you're at a charter school. Okay, I'm going to stop listening, right? We've done this work in comprehensive high schools as well. And so what it's about is how do you work with staff and build those skills in staff so that it's not just person-based, right? It's that then if Gilbert left, well, then that legacy leaves, right? It's how do we institutionalize these practices to replace the system, the systemic practices that no longer serve our students, especially students of color. And to say that and do that and pursue it unapologetically, right? And so when we go into empowering others, we also empower ourselves, but there's this power, and I digress, so bear with me, I'll come back. Is that this power shift though that happens is that it's not about empowering anybody or saving anybody, it's about walking with and in journey with, and that when we level that field, then we are both invested, both parties become invested in the same mission and vision. So anyway, that was just, I'll jump in whenever.
No, wonderful addition, Cynthia, and you're right on. And it's easy for us to like walk away. And you're right, comprehensive schools, we started changing culture. We had wonderful partnerships with the teachers who knew our boys, and all we wanted them to do is see the boys we saw in that group room. The wonderful young men we had a different persona outside. And a lot of it was to protect themselves. Their neighborhood, the path that they walked home wasn't safe. They had to be the tough young men they were to survive and get through. But deep down, they were a whole other young child inside that had wonderful qualities that others just didn't have time to see. And our whole goal was to let the whole school, the principal, everyone know that. We took them to presentations. We had them working at homecoming. They were selling snacks. We had them doing things at the school that they were like, what is all this? Because they didn't fit into Senate. They didn't fit into the other clubs at the school, but we created a space where they could, right? And that's how we changed culture and institutionalized that there. All right, so advisory and student developmental frameworks here. So honestly, I was trained in experiential education as a young undergrad student, and it stayed with me forever. So if you're not familiar with experiential ed or EE, I highly encourage you. I think there's a curriculum out there called Y-Try that also mimics this. We integrated this into every possible avenue. Now, if you look at this photo, these are my kids. There's not a single cell phone out. Right? We always talk about all the kids and their cell phones. No. Look at these kids. They're engaged, they're involved, and I was facilitating a group. Now, if you've never done this activity, it's called the web, right? It's a ball of yarn and a beach ball. It won't cost you more than about $4 in materials. But in all honesty, we start the conversation in the circle with what are the supports that you have in your life that hold you up? And they have to get the ball of yarn. And the only rule is you can't pass it to the person to the right or the left of you. You have to throw it across. So someone might say, my grandfather, and then they throw it. Someone might say, my teacher, my advisor, my neighbor, my job. They start listing church, all the things, and they have to dig. And sometimes we have to wait to hear the young person say, what are the supports that you have? My best friend. So we go through that, and then we have this web. So I say, okay, now here's the beach ball. The beach ball are all the things that keep you from succeeding. And I have the kids name it. And you can even have them write it on the ball with a Sharpie. Probation, drugs, gangs, whatever the issues are in their life, they're sharing out what the challenges are. Once they're done, I drop that ball on that net. If it falls through the net, I tell them, we don't have enough supports on our net. What supports are we missing or do we need? And we start adding more until that web can hold that ball. And we show the young people there are abilities. What do we need? How do we foster that? But it's some of the most easiest way to remove vulnerability and young people speaking about the challenges in their lives and also the supports. And it's so enlightening as a facilitator to say, oh my gosh, I never knew that about this young person. So experiential ed, I will go to the grave saying it's wonderful. If you don't know someone who can do it, reach out, get trained, buy the equipment. It's worth every penny. And again, no cell phones in that picture. Every young person's engaged. I hear this all the time. Oh, their cell phones. And I'm like, I never had an issue. I never had an issue when I went in there and I facilitated stuff with young people because they were engaged. They wanted to be it. And it's all challenge by choice. There are rules behind this, right? And if the one kid who can't do it, you make them your helper. Okay, you're going to hold the ball for me then, because they're not quite ready to share, but they're going to be part of the process, right? All of this supports SEL, basic developmental skills, soft skills, lagging skills, right? Then we start working on building culture and norms at the school, a climate that's supportive. In a way, our advisors were always there to support guided discipline, right? This process of figuring out what the problem was. If you're not familiar with roses and thorns, it's just a small activity where I got the kids together in the morning and I'd say, all right, what's your rose? Tell me your highlight. But what's your thorn for the day? I want to know what you're walking into for the day. You know what? My rose is that after school, I'm going to go eat with my friend. But my thorn is my dad yelled at me before I came in and it really put me in a mood. Okay, great. Now I know what's happening and how your day is going to be here at the school. I want to know that. We started every day off with advisory because this was our check-in. We needed to know how these young people were doing, right? Food was a huge thing. In my house, family means food. Well, we were creating that. So one day a week, some of the advisors they'd all cook, kids would do pancake breakfasts, whatever they needed to. You made the advisory model and place yours. Exploring how young people took care of themselves. These are all activities we did embedded into the advisory framework. It created ultimately what we've heard in some of these other slides in the research at the bottom, our own family. We had family meetings and we used the same language. And I won't lie, our charter school is in the heart of a gang neighborhood. I had a lot of kids from that gang, but they all knew that they checked it out the door. And once they came into the school, it didn't cross over, right? And we had honest conversations, right? This is home. It doesn't penetrate home. Somos familia. We said that all the time with our kids. We are a family. When you frame it like that for young people, it's harder for them to yell at you, be mad at you, or treat you bad because you're creating a culture and environment of family, right? So that was kind of our goal. And these are just some of the activities that I wanted to just share that for you. All right, moving in. So these were plastered all over our school, right? What do we expect of young people? And kids would come in and they come in for a family meeting. They might be new to the school, never had a disciplinary type meeting with me or a family meeting. And I would point to the wall and I said, this is what we're going to go over today. And we were teaching kids, you know, you are accountable for your behavior. Your behavior affects others, right? You're expected to carry out an appropriate consequence. And so it was crazy because when we would go through our family meeting, I would tell the young person, okay, so I'm a big believer that young people can always right their wrong. How do you feel you should remediate the situation? And they would come up with these crazy, suspend me for like 20 days. And I'm like, oh my God, no, why? Why would I do that? No. What's appropriate? How do you right your wrong? And then we would sit through this exploration process. Some of them would be like, you know what? I'm going to do community school cleaning. So we had a night program. I'm going to stay after school and I'm going to clean all the classrooms for my teacher. Like they would come up with their own resolution of what they thought was fair for the incident that they did. And these kids were blown away at the fact that they had ever been asked, how do you right your wrong? You tell me what we should do. And I'm not going to kick you out for 20 days because that's just ridiculous, right? That doesn't mean anything. And it was great to see. Sometimes they would write letters to the folks that were affected by whatever it was they did. It was just a variety of ways that they could address it in a different way. And then, of course, we always told them, you're expected to change your behavior, right? We want you to learn the skills to be a better person because we know that's who you are, who you can be, and who we believe you are. And so these were our basic rules, right? This was my guide, better than any other handbook, that we continue to support children. It was all over our walls. It was what we believed in. And these were kind of like our rules. All right, so I want to close up by leaving you with a little tool here. You know, remember we talked about climate, attitudes, beliefs at your school. So here's 6 basic ways that you can go back to your schools and really look at, does your organization, your administration, your culture really prioritize relationships with young people in your school? Walk through this chart. Look at how you can assess some of this data. Is it important to you? Are you actually intentionally investing? Cynthia says, unapologetically fund those things that are important. I agree 100%. Put the resources into it. We can't just keep asking people to do everything for free. These are ways you can go back and say, hey, you know, when there's a cut, are we going to cut this? or do we really truly value how we implement this? So just some basic principles and guidelines you can take back and look at your schools, assess the culture, the environment, the climate, the attitudes, beliefs, and say, hey, do we really value relationships? Because I will tell you, at the core of SEL and truly the ABCs is that if you're not invested in creating trusting relationships with young people, you're going to have a hard time implementing SEL frameworks in your school. It's at the core of what we're able to do with young people in creating these environments will be successful. And believe it or not, young people are actually pretty open. I never had a young person who just shied away. They might initially not trust me, but once they did, they would tell me everything. And it was to support them. Cynthia.
So, and to build off of that, it's the relationships also that you have with staff, right? And how this is facilitated. One of the activities, just to throw it out there, that is a takeaway is I've had it where I get staff to pull out a piece of paper and I say, I'm not going to look at it. You could do what you want with the paper afterwards, but I'm going to just name some student names. And I want you to just unfiltered write down whatever comes to mind, right? And then we're teaching our staff, we're walking through what are the physiological reactions that people have, and then identify the emotions attached to it, right? So that I would name a student who's high functioning, straight A's. I would name a student who's a pain in our butts. I would name, all kinds of different students, right? And then I would have time for teachers to process and staff to process with one another, because it's okay if you're not somebody's person, but there's somebody out there on staff that is. And so how do we intentionally set time aside to say, I'm not their person, but they need somebody. They need a champion. I'm not it. It's okay, but let me find somebody, right? And then also though, if you're not their person, why? Like what reactions do you have physically, emotionally with a student to be able to move forward? Because we say like, okay, a so-and-so will leave, but their replacement comes back, whether it's a staff or a student. I will say that any day, that as soon as, you say somebody's like so sarcastic, oh, we'll have 5 of them here, like, and in a joking way, but it's, how do we navigate those spaces with one another as staff? And I'm telling you, that also helps with staff retention, because if we're asking them to create relationships with students, you have to create relationships with staff. And where do we have time for that? Right. Well, if we don't make the time, then we're going to make the time to do interventions.
Absolutely. One thing I didn't highlight was I have these same photos of me doing these experiential education activities with the staff. We delve into our supports, our resources, our web. We went through a lot of these activities. It was learning by doing because we were a project-based school. And our staff was learning by doing, learning how to be an advisor. We did the activities. We walked through all of them. And we got to know each other and build those relationships. So everything I practiced with young people, we practiced as adults and as colleagues to run through the same activities because it was a full culture, right? And you're right, as far as staff retention and those beliefs. It wasn't 100% perfect, granted those hiccups and challenges. And I did say, your staff sometimes, and there's so much being placed on teachers' plates, so I respect that. And we also know some teachers love their content more than they love kids, and some teachers love kids more than they love their content. The ones in our models who tend to be more successful are the ones who love kids more than their content. But, sometimes it's not a fit. Sometimes you really just do love math more than you love kids, and you just want to teach math. It may not be a fit for you, and that's okay. We have to identify that, right? Because at the core of SEL and our model of what we were doing was that we really believed in young people, and we knew it was going to stretch us to have those relationships because we were taking them on. So I'll leave with that. My reference sheet, a lot of the links, I will say, if you're interested in Dr. Ross Green's stuff, this website specifically has all of his sheets, his tools, video links. It's all free, and you can go check it out. I referenced this right here with regards to the chapter and the work we're doing, only because we put a lot of assessment tools in there, but I am going to drop it right now in the chat. If you're interested in like assessing or looking for tools around potential violence and or gang work specific, that compendium was issued by the CDC, and why reinvent the tool? There's plenty of tools in there you can go ahead and reference. And then of course, Big Picture Learning, if you're not familiar with them and the advisory model and how to get one started, go and check it out. They have wonderful resource materials, and go watch that video of Carlos working with his young people. It's just inspiring. Outside of that, my contact information is here. I have pivoted over to the city government from direct practice and schoolwork, but we are now looking at how we take SEL models into the work we do with our community. If we weren't doing that here, what's the point of the work, you know? And so, we have a huge issue with the amount of homicides in our city, but one program we were able to start was a response to those who were affected by it. And that means the immediate community. So we started a team with another social worker and myself, and we were going out and debriefing with folks, because oftentimes, cops show up, they tape off the area, they do the investigation, nobody can get to their house, and then they leave and nobody knows nothing. And we said, we need to change how we respond when there's an incident in the community. So we come out, we meet with them, we offer a space, a community center, a library. We walk them through resources where they can get support for trauma if they were affected by it. And it's a different model of working with community than it was before. SEL can translate in a lot of ways, not just the environments that we talk about in our schools. So thank you so much. And I know we have a little bit of time, questions, answers, Q&A, happy to do so. Let me stop sharing.
Gilbert and Cynthia, thank you so much. I am deeply moved by your wisdom and your willingness to share your insight and your time with us. I know we just have a few minutes left, so I appreciate that there was some wonderful conversation happening in the chat. If anybody had a question that is still burning that didn't get answered, I'll just invite you to unmute if that feels comfortable, or you're also still welcome to use the chat. We'll just leave a little bit of space for that. Sophia, go ahead.
Hi, and go. Sorry.
Oh, Sonia, go ahead.
Oh, me? Okay.
Yes.
I'm just like, my head is about to explode. This has been so inspiring, and I just can't help but thinking what the timing is right. Like, we're about to go into we're ending this school year, and I just you literally, the both of you, thank you for your work. Thank you for presenting. Thank you for you gave really a framework that I personally feel I can take back to my director and say, here's where I think we start our next school year. And just the idea of the planning around that, my heart is full right now. Thank you both so much for sharing. Yes. And the work that you continue to do. And you two are a dynamic duo. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Sonia. And just to put it out there, I know as a school leader, budgets are coming up, and budgets for next year are coming up for April. And so if you're looking at funding, if you need any insights on that, just, reach out. And I'm on the hub team and on the SEL4NM leadership. And so just reach out, because what it comes down to when it comes to capacity and staffing and all of that, we are post-COVID, however we name it, we are rebuilding culture. But we also have to assess, what is our climate? Where are we starting from? Right. And so I put that in the chat about those distinctions. And even that, I'm like, I could geek out on that all day too. Amy, she's my go-to person to speak with. It's how do you prioritize? Where do you start? And if you just put relationships at the center, you can't go wrong, right? So I appreciate Sonia.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. I wish it wasn't so late. I wish we could continue this conversation. It's been a joy to be a part of this. Gilbert and Cynthia, thank you again. Just a deep bow of gratitude for you and the work that you do. I'm going to, before we sign off, just invite Kathy Price to unmute. I know she has some information for us about World Social Emotional Learning Day coming up.
Well, thank you. And Gilbert, I love the story about how you reframed the situation in trauma, and that cradle to grave, that relationships in SEL is so important. I want all of us in our different institutions, whether it's being at labs, whether it's being in schools, whether it's being in government, to really take time on Friday, September 11th to celebrate SEL Day. If I will put a link in the chat, and please get with us. We want everyone to do something, even if it's just a simple tweet or text or something like that. We would love for you to get involved with SEL Day in any way you want. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, Anna.
Awesome. And Kathy, that's March 11th, right? Awesome. Super. Thank you, everyone. And just a reminder that we have our Padlet that is full of our resources. We have the slide deck from today as well, and a recording of today's session will be available on our Padlet soon. So please take some time to look at that. I know that's been dropped into the chat by Christina. Well, I'm sorry to end the session. Again, this was a wonderful one. I hate to see it end, but I deeply appreciate all of you. Thanks for spending an hour of your time with us, and we can't wait to see you in 2 weeks. I hope you have a wonderful start to your month of March.
Thank you,
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you, everybody, so much. Amazing.
And Carlos, you got